Hi, class. This week we're speaking about legal and ethical issues. We're on week 15, only one more week to go. The semester's gone by quite quickly, at least in my opinion. I'm kind of starting from, I'm not kind of starting, I am starting from slide 10, just because I feel like some of the things covered earlier in the PowerPoint we kind of discussed, and there's so much to cover. I want to try to get through it all in the 15 minutes that I have. So that's why I'm starting right here. What I find this slide interesting because it's talking about victimization, and a lot, I feel like, so much has been repetitive, but, that's helpful for learning. So much of what we've learned has to do with, the aging adult potentially becoming anxious, having maybe more time on their hands due to retirement not being exactly what they planned. And again, a lot of these are very stereotypical situations, but it's interesting. Older adults are less likely to be victimized than younger adults, but I think older adults think about being victimized more than younger adults, potentially. I think, again, because of the more time on their hands, the anxiety about maybe not feeling as strong as they used to be, feeling vulnerable, feeling weak. Um, that can cause older adults to fear crime more. Now, I will say in the news we do hear about older adults being victimized of violent crimes, but I think those two are very publicized because of how terrible they are. I think crime happens a lot to people who aren't necessarily in an elderly bracket. Granted, crime is not subjective necessarily to age, but I think they worry about it more than maybe a person in their 20s. But I just found that very interesting. Moving right along. Oh, sorry about that little box there. Moving right along. Um, so again, fearful might be less evident in relative age. Again, depending on where you live, where you come from, safety. I feel like for my grandparents, for example, I think they feel pretty safe based on where they live and they're comfortable in their home or whatnot. But I think for other people, I think of my great grandmother who lived by herself, and it was like I said, the sun went down before. The sun went down, and she wanted to be inside, locked in. Just very fearful of the outside world. Um, and I mean, people change over the years. Generations change, and so even being afraid of the unknown of how youth may be, or people who commit crime, maybe perpetuates a bigger fear of being a victim of crime. I mean, if you watch the news, it's quite depressing. Whether it's things that are happening overseas or things here happening here. So if an older person's home watching the news all day, of course they're going to be paranoid about what's going to be happening to them. Women are more fearful than men, which I think is pretty common in general. Those with less money are more afraid than those with more money, and that could be in the sense of the neighborhood. Like crime may happen more often in neighborhoods where there is more of a socioeconomic um, downshift versus ones that are more high scale. I know I'm from one of the worst cities in the United States, and this is terrible to say, and I'm not an aging adult necessarily in the sense that I'm not, 65 or older, but I worry often when I go home about home invasions because that's something that happens frequently there, which sounds so terrible to say, but it's a common thing. So it'd be more common to happen there than maybe where I live now. So there's things like neighborhood watch, granny squads, that's so cute. Escort services to provide to stores and banks. So again, they're not alone, feeling vulnerable. Maybe someone would see a disability that they've acquired, or maybe they've become blind or they're deaf. I think too, like as your senses start to kind of drift away, meaning hearing loss or eyesight, or even your ability to move, um, you get more nervous about things because what if I don't hear someone break in, or what if I can't see this happening, or someone coming towards me, or whatever it may be. And so there's some nervousness with that, which is to be expected. So there is reimbursement for state programs. Obviously, there's consequences for committing a crime against the elderly. And I will say this too, as as you guys become future clinicians, the state also has like free counseling for victims of crime, which is a nice thing that they have because, I mean, obviously victims of crime need counseling. Most crimes committed by elders are misdemeanors, so shoplifting, um, maybe some sort of fraudulent type things. They're not necessarily the major crimes, but then again, I'm sure those kinds of crimes happen as well. Elderly population in prison is expected to increase. Again, while people stay in prison, they're going to age. The criminal activity most likely to be engaged in by older inmates are violence against a family member, white collar crimes, drug sales, and alcohol related crimes. Older professional criminals. Some professional criminals remain active throughout life. I think of the guy who was arrested, I believe, in Malibu just a few years back, who was a major mob boss and killed a lot of people. And he was, I think, they found him in his 80s, living in this apartment with his girlfriend. And so it was a really big deal because he had been kind of hiding out for a long time. And of course, he was older. A lot of those people maybe from that era, from that time period where maybe those major crime organizations were really running large and doing big things, are probably in their older years. More people are being sent to prison and receiving longer sentences. Um, Older convicts tend to be chronic offenders. If it's a way of life, then it's kind of all you know. Prison is almost like home. There's some comfort there. There's that movie. It's older. Probably most of you have seen it, I feel like maybe. But the Shawshank Redemption, granted, it's not about modern prison, but there's some components there that are super powerful about prison and like living there your whole life and then trying to be part of the outside world. It can be quite hard. The three strikes law increased the number of aging prisoners. Again, like you commit two crimes and you get the third crime and you're in there, I believe, for life. So you got a lot of people who maybe have made some poor choices and now are dealing with life sentences. Elderly prisoners do not fit into the younger population. Um, Inmates are not eligible for Medicare or Medicaid. Prisoners tend to age faster than others. Well, again, when you're living in prison, I mean, that's a high stress situation. Um, so, of course, you're going to age faster. Usually, if you're under a lot of stress in your life, you're going to age faster than a person who doesn't have any. You'll notice people who never had children tend to age a lot less faster than people who have, just because children are stressful. Regardless of the kind of kids your kids are, children cause aging and stress. So, and again, with inmates not eligible for Medicare or Medicaid, they do have full medical care in prison. Actually, some prisons are quite state of the art with their medical care. Let's see, medical parole release, community placement, special prisons, or prison units. There could be other options for prisoners, um, depending on their crimes, where they can maybe um, be more comfortable as they are maybe less of a threat to society. That doesn't always necessarily make society feel better. I think of that pillowcase rapist, which it's kind of like overwhelming the fact that this guy is out and living in a house out in, I think, Palmdale. People were very, 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 very upset about it because every time he was released, he still attacked people and raped them. But they've let him out, and he's living in a home that they've placed him in with, I think, a security officer because I think they're afraid of what somebody may do to him and, again, what he could be capable of. But it's very interesting how, decisions are made for sometimes aging criminals. Elder abuse. Okay, so this happens to elderly people. Between 3 to 6% of community dwelling elders have been abused. Again, neglect is the most common form. There's physical abuse, psychological abuse, financial, material abuse. That happens a lot. People take advantage of older people so easily. And then there's the violations of rights, not allowing to vote, intercepting mail. Again, it's almost like, it's not almost like, it is like child abuse in a sense. Like we talked about ageism and how ageism is faced not only in the younger population, but also in the older population. An aging adult could be very vulnerable depending on their medical ailments. their psychological awareness, what's going on with them, they could be a huge candidate for being taken advantage of, whether it be by family members or someone who swoops in thinking that they're, like convincing everyone they're next to kin and maybe get some sort of directives, and is able to maybe financially take over all their finances, and piddle them away, or actually hurt them, or just neglect them, leave them locked up in a room. Um, it's quite sad. And this is something we as future clinicians need to be aware of, because clearly abuse is not okay on any level, and we need to step in and do what we need to do. And a social worker would need to get involved, and again, proper consequences for those doing those kinds of things. Self-abuse and neglect, intentional or unintentional not taking care of, self-abandonment. And this might be a person who could be at the point of not wanting to commit suicide, but is doing everything in order to die. So that's something for, as a clinician, we need to be aware of, because that's important. Strained families must have more help available to them. Help from social services, home care services, protective services, personal care services, and family counseling. Again, if you're in a stressful family situation and then you add on some of the responsibilities of aging and what comes along with that, you're going to need some extra support. And especially if you don't have financial resources or the proper medical resources to take care of you, you're going to need some outside support to make sure that you're getting those things done. I think we've learned over and over again, for some of you that are in my family therapy class, I think there's a lot of, you can see that there's a lot of opportunities with this aging population to do a lot of family therapy, and see more than just the individual. And I think sometimes it's a must to meet with the family or a caretaker or somebody to kind of make sure everybody's on the same page. Predictors of mistreatment: poverty, race, functional and cognitive impairment, worsening cognitive impairment, living with someone, caretaker dependency. And again, we've talked about caretaker stress. The more your mind goes, the more vulnerable you may be. And again, the socioeconomic factors. Like I said, crime can happen to anyone. But sometimes there is more awareness of where it happens and how often it happens. It could be dependent upon poverty. Ethnicity could play a factor based on data and statistics as far as who crime happens to more often, with different ethnicities. Different races have different respect for elders, whereas others don't. And so trying to be aware of some of those things as a clinician is important, not being judgmental, but just being aware and looking maybe for some signs. Nursing home abuse, we know that can happen. It's important to be mindful before you put somebody in a nursing home, the kind of nursing home it is. Over 30% of nursing home staff report having witnessed abuse, which is that's too high of a number. That's so sad. When you think out of 100%, that's just way too high. And, families are really trusting that these people take care of their loved ones. Fraud. I think this is a huge thing. How often do we now get bombarded with emails and phone calls and all these things of, if you do this or if you do that, you'll get this or you'll get that. And I think older people are so susceptible, depending too on how desperate they are financially, of being willing to invest in something, or, oh, you really need this, I'll give this to you, a relative or a friend or whatever, or fraudulent type things like, I'm stuck in this country and I need this amount of money to get out, can you send it to me? Fraud happens to even young people. It's not, again, an age thing necessarily, but for an older person, I could see the vulnerability in this happening to them. It's something to be very conscientious of, not only for you personally, but also for future clients. If something sounds a little fishy, maybe asking some more questions and maybe asking to speak to somebody else, because this is a way for someone who maybe doesn't have a lot or is on a fixed income to lose everything. And that is so sad, especially at their age. You'd hate for an older person to lose their home because they did some sort of weird housing thing, thinking that they're going to be taken care of, and then they lose everything. So these are just some things to be aware of. Unfortunately, they're very sad things, but things to be aware of. I hope this is helpful for you. Keep up the hard work. I look forward to your brochures, and only one more week to go. Talk to you guys later.